Alrighty, Bowhunters, welcome back to another episode of Becoming a Bowhunter. Sitting here online with Mr. George Ryals. Welcome, my friend.
Thank you very much. Good to see you.
Yeah, likewise, mate. So you're joining us from Georgia. Whereabouts in Georgia did you say you're from?
We're in Snellville, Georgia, which is about 40 minutes from the Atlanta airport. We're kind of northeast of the Atlanta airport.
Yeah, and right there you've got an incredible facility that people come and visit you from all over America. And then those who don't get to come and see you, you can obviously, or there is a thing that you actually use as a service, which is improvemyarchery.com, where people from all around the world can use your services as a bow hunting coach or an archery coach, essentially to
Yep.
help fix their form, which is obviously, I think, something that people don't necessarily recognize when they first pick up a bow. It's one of these things that you grab a bow and you're like, this looks like fun. Like, why not? Let's have a few shots. How hard can it be? And then there's so many little tweaks and techniques and bits and pieces that can either set you up for a great foundation or completely ruin your journey down the track, which is a lot of what I want to talk to you about today. So maybe what's the facility that you guys actually run, the team that you guys have? Tell us a little bit more about kind of the background of that in general, and then we can dive into some more tech talk.
So early on, I was a product designer for a bow company and then moved over to a release and accessory company and design releases and things for them. And once that I got done with that, I moved back down to my home state here in Georgia and opened this place up. We got about 6,000 square feet,
Hmm.
and I've got a 20-yard range in here. And
Awesome.
on Saturdays, I host come try archery day,
Yeah.
right? And it just kind of organically grew. I opened up the store right in the midst of Hunger Games and Disney Brave and all that. It was like the perfect
Yeah.
storm for
Amazing.
the archery business, man. And I would have on Saturday, I would have 4 or 5 classes jam packed,
Wow.
30 kids in the class, couple, 2 or 3 coaches managing the whole thing. So over time, they were a lot of kids that would come and go and they shot archery for fun, but there were
Hmm.
a few that got really serious. So I pulled them aside into a more intermediate, class. And then from those intermediate kids, we decided, well, let's make a team, right? Because these kids are wanting to go to the archery tournaments and be archery pros and, whatever. So I was like, well, let's make a team. And we sat around and we chose a name and, all of that. And we call ourselves the Hornets, right? Initially, it was Snellville Stingers, right?
Hmm.
And the try archery on Saturday were the Honeybees. The intermediate class were the Yellow Jackets. And then we had
Love
the
it.
Hornets, right?
Yeah.
And we have ultimately dropped the Snellville Stinger name, and we're just the Hornets now.
Yeah. Okay.
And over the years, all the kids who were local Hornets would go to international tournaments, national tournaments, and they'd meet other kids and become friends with them. And those other kids didn't have coaches. And next thing we knew, I had an off-campus team
Yeah.
that was pretty big. And we could fly to France for the World Cup indoor, or go to the Netherlands for Kings, or go to California, or, whatever. And all these kids would converge and then they would compete together.
Yeah.
So
It's
I'd
incredible.
show up with 40 kids wearing the same shirt, to an archery tournament. And they were the most dedicated, you know, uh, high performance kids that you could imagine. And so they did really well,
Mm.
through the archery events. And some of them have grown up now. There's tons of them who are in their, either early 30s or late 20s. They're married. Some of them have kids, the whole bit. Some of them started big businesses, the whole thing. So it's been pretty cool over the last 15 years running those programs.
Definitely, yeah. You've got quite a team that have kind of evolved into their own practices and stuff within the bow hunting and archery worlds now, right? Like they're either working for big archery companies, they've got their own YouTube channels, they've kind of just developed into their own piece, and it all kind of started with that good foundation that you built with them, right?
Yeah, and the friendships between them, they kind of cross-pollinated each other's
Mm,
efforts,
hmm
like Colby started UltraView,
hmm
and all of that started with, man, I got to come up with some way to, make some money because I'm starving to death as a college student. I'm eating $1 burritos and studying myself into a lazy eye. I got to come up with something. And I was like, well, these little fingers, like on the ends of releases, you could just 3D print those and sell them in colors. I bet people would buy those, right?
Yeah.
So he started through like 3D printing bits and parts and, grips and stuff. And then he came up with a scope idea and then
Mhm.
it just went, forward from there.
Yeah. And that's a
Parallel to that,
huge
Chris
company
B
now,
was
right?
getting into, say that again.
It's a huge company now, right? Like UltraView,
Oh, it's
they're
huge.
ridiculous.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, it's huge. Yeah, they ship stuff all over the world. They got a
hmm
whole giant dealer network. I think he's probably got 60 or so employees there,
Yeah. Wow.
from, executive to assemblers,
hmm
he's got a whole full facility of people there now.
That's incredible.
And Chris B kind of developed parallel to Colby. They were competitors and best buds, all through their tournament,
Mhm.
career as juniors. And Chris used his media company growth that he created to help Colby, advertise and market, the UltraView stuff, and they kind of help each other.
Yeah, that's
And
awesome.
there's tons of other kids that are doing other things. Like I had a kid, Sam Gary's one of the current team kids. He's, 19 or almost 20, making a product called Magic Finger that goes, it's an addition to an Ultra View release finger that you can change the angle. And
Hmm.
so quite a few kids are getting into the business and using each other's experience. It's been excellent.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I mean, the crazy thing is, so out here in Australia, we don't have a system to check how many archers or bow hunters we have. Like we've got different like 3D AAA, we've got the ABA and stuff like that, but not you don't have to sign up to it to be a bow hunter. You don't have to sign up to it to be an archer. You can just go and grab a bow from your local store and just start shooting. And so there's no like overall club that says, okay, we've got this many bow hunters here or this many archers here in Australia. So it's a hard thing to say like, yes, we've got this many, and that's a good starting place. Essentially, you guys have like, I don't know, 30 million people that sign up to an overarching board for America, don't you?
We do. I don't know what the exact number is, but a quick Google search and you could figure out how many bow hunting licenses are sold in the United States.
Mm,
Um, some states count them differently, like you buy a hunting license and then you also have to have an archery tag. Some states you just buy a hunting license and you can bow hunt. But they have a fairly accurate number out there for how many, but it's in the, tens of millions for sure,
yeah, wow. Yeah,
of bow hunters. And I mean, even in downtown Atlanta, you can find a patch of woods that's got deer in it that you can hunt,
that's crazy.
right? So
Yeah.
there's plenty of hunting opportunities here.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And where you are is essentially all whitetail?
Say again?
Is it all whitetail deer where you are?
Yeah, it's all whitetail here. We've got
Mm,
whitetail, we have pigs, and then various small game, but there's not a huge variety of deer and as it is in the middle of the United States or on the West Coast, you've got a little bit of a selection, right?
hmm And then the hunting style, then does that mean there's a lot of just sitting in stands and waiting for the whitetail to come in, or there is still spot and stalk that goes on around you?
Not a lot of people do the spot and stalk here because the woods are thick enough
Mm,
where if you're not within 20 or 30 yards, you won't even know the animal is there,
yeah,
right?
wow. Yeah.
It's dense, right?
hmm
So typically we set up in between feeding and bedding areas and catch them in between. We set up on pass throughs where the bucks are going back and forth looking for hot does during the rut,
Yeah.
edges of fields in the middle of the day, that sort of stuff. And we get up in the stand and wait because the deer here, because the woods are so thick, they know you're there long before you know where they are.
Mhm. Yeah.
It's nearly impossible to sneak up on one here. And they're skittish. There've been a lot of bullets and arrows shot at these deer. So they don't hang around and try to figure out what that noise was. They just run.
They're gone. Yeah, yeah, definitely. And so, what's the longest stint and like longest stint that you've had in a stand, and then the amount of days that you had in that stand before you actually shot a deer?
Well, sometimes, I hunt in a saddle, so
Mhm.
it's really mobile. I can just go up the tree and then decide I don't like the spot, and I can go down and move 60 yards and go back up another tree. So there's times where I say, this looks like a pretty good spot. I'm just going to climb up in this tree here and just see what's going on, and then shoot a deer within a couple of hours of
Yeah, wow.
getting up in the tree.
Hmm.
But then there's the instance of you've got the big buck on camera. You got a pretty good idea that he's up here in these big planted pines and he's coming down this way. So you'll sit there and you'll get up before daylight and you'll stay there all day until dark, hoping that he decides to stand up and walk down to you. Sometimes it's successful, sometimes it's not, but it's a good idea during the rut here is stay in the woods all day
Yeah.
because they're moving around. If you're not going to stay all day during the peak of the rut, I'll come in. If I can't stay all day, I'll come in at 10 o'clock in the morning and stay through the midday hours. And usually I see a lot more movement in the midday hours during the rut because the bucks are on their feet moving everywhere trying to find the does.
Yeah, okay. That's very interesting. I've hunted a lot of red deer and fallow deer out here in particular, like during the rut. And so seen a lot of their kind of characteristics where like the reds in particular, they'll bed down with their harem to start with. Like
Hmm.
they'll put the girls to bed and then they'll hop up and they'll do that maneuvering throughout the day. They'll go for a walk down to the water. They'll come back and check their girls. They'll go out and just do a circle and see if there's any satellite bucks around or satellite stags in that case. What sort of I guess what are some of the characteristics of the whitetail deer and what they'll do once they've found the girls? Are they going to stay with them consistently? Are they very territorial? Like, will they fight a lot between the males in that rut period?
There's a lot of fighting in between the males during that period. I hear that fallow deer and red deer are a lot more aggressive in their fighting,
Mm,
but there is fighting. Like we shot one deer this year that had quite a bit of his tines broken off, to where he had been like really fighting like crazy. So, but whitetails don't vocalize like red deer do.
yeah.
There's no roar or anything like that. And the hallmark of a whitetail is they'll leave kind of a signpost that we call a scrape on the ground,
Hmm.
and they come back through and check those scrape
So a
lines
lot more like a fallow.
periodically.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
so they'll set up multiple scrapes and go to all of them in the little location. Yeah.
right.
Okay. Yeah.
Yep.
And then
And
the rattling on a scrape, is that pretty effective to kind of call them in?
well, not necessarily rattling on a scrape, but rattling in the peak of the rut can help.
Hmm.
I haven't had a ton of success with rattling in the southeast,
Hmm.
but Texas, and in other outlying areas, they've had pretty good success with rattling. Most of the time in Georgia, we just sit and wait
Yeah.
because the deer are pretty skittish and they don't mess around. You can kind of ruin a spot if you ting your stand as you're getting up in it, and
Yeah.
you're not going to see anything that day.
Yeah, I've had some friends that have gone over to Stewart Island. So there's a whitetail herd over at Stewart Island on the south of New Zealand. There's like the only, I think it might be one of two maybe herds in the southern hemisphere of whitetail deer. It might even be the only one. I can't remember. I did do a podcast on that, but I forget more than I actually learn on this thing for sure. But they were saying like you had to be so close and your bow had to be nice and fast and everything had to just pretty much play out completely right to be able to get the shot because they are so skittish and they'll jump the string. They'll just be
Oh yeah.
they're out of there as fast as possible. In regards to this hunting style that you guys are doing where you're sitting up in the tree, what is like kind of the golden shot zone, I guess, like the distance that you want them to be at before you'll take a shot?
Well, if you took a poll here in Georgia, I would be willing to bet that the average shot one year, this is old data, but this is old data from the 90s. And back then, the average shot was 11.7 yards.
Wow.
And you just can't see them, unless they're
Right
closer,
there. Yeah.
right? And typically nowadays, bow hunters are shooting a little bit farther, and I have to remind the kids, it was like, hey man, the real brag here is how close the deer was when you
Yeah.
shot it, not
Yeah.
how far away it was when you shot it. If you want to tell somebody you're a good hunter, tell them you shot this deer at 12 yards,
Yeah.
right? And typically it's going to be 20 yards ish because we're setting up our stands on a trail or some pass through or some, pinch point or
Hinge. Yeah.
something that maximizes the amount of traffic that goes through an area. And we're pretty much just right down on top of them.
Yeah, wow. Yeah. Makes a lot of sense. I mean, kind of one of the things that I see a lot of, and obviously you guys are very archery focused that then transitions into bow hunting, but I feel there's like, obviously there's so much crossover because of the skill and technique that's needed, but also when you go and you start shooting targets, especially if you're in a position where you're doing it for competition, there is that same adrenaline dump and feeling that crosses over when you're in front of an animal and you've got an animal right there and you're ready to take the shot, and the adrenaline dump happens, and there's all these things that can either go in your favor or it can completely slip away, and things can go completely wrong. But what I'm getting at is that there is a great foundation that you can set up your whole shot process on. So it's a repeatable thing that you can consistently do no matter what the situation is. If you practice when you're calm and you practice maybe doing some exercise and whatever else to get your heart rate up, you should be able to have that same process again and again and again if you practice it 1,001 times plus some. So what I'd love to talk to you about is kind of the foundation that you help people to build to make sure that they've got that repeatable process. So going through the shot process, where you start, when someone comes in who's been shooting a bow for 10 years versus someone who comes in for the first time, I'm pretty sure we would go through the same concepts because it's going to be the same for majority of people in regards to this is what a good shot process looks like.
Yeah, so the first thing I'll tell you, just to answer a couple things that you said there, is the I encourage bow hunters to also shoot target archery,
Hmm.
even if it's just a little local league or something.
Yeah.
It's when you walk into that league night and you have all of these strangers in there that you may or may not know. And there's that peer pressure. There's that feeling that you want to protect yourself from looking like a fool or, whatever the emotional reasons are to create that, anxiety. In Georgia, we'll look this way, we're up in the stand, and you look this way, nothing, and then you kind of pay attention over here for a little while, and then you look back, and he's standing right there. You didn't hear him come in. It's like they just grow up out of the ground, and you go from 0 to 160 heart rate just because there he is, right?
Hmm.
You know, if you happen to see him a long way away and he's taking time to meander his way over to you, you're just a complete and total basket case and you're blacked out by the time he gets there, right? And target archery, the repetitiousness of target archery and shooting with that emotion lasts for 3 hours during a game,
Hmm.
right? Rather than it being instant on and then the come down where everything is shaky, right?
Yeah.
You don't
Yeah.
really get that descent into the shaking and all that in target archery because the finish is a little bit more protracted than what it is when you shoot a deer, right?
Hmm.
But experimenting with what happens to you when you become excited or elevated, I'll say. And you mentioned that do a little exercise to get your heart rate up. Well, it's not really your heart rate that's
Hmm.
causing your bow to hit different, right?
No. Yes.
The anxiety causes muscle tension.
Mhm.
And that muscle tension is different than anything else you can get when you're just shooting your bow, right?
Yes. Okay.
And the muscle tension causes the broadheads to fly a little different just because it can actually change. Let's say if you shoot it through the paper and you've got some guy that's freaked out and he's about to shoot his shoot off arrow, right? Say,
Hmm.
hey, real quick, come over here and just shoot an arrow through the paper, right? And he may not even get the same tear because your bow is not sighted in for that kind of tension, right?
Meaning like the extra grip or the
The
things that the
extra
muscles might
just
be doing. Yeah.
Yeah, you may have noticed, right? I call it like when you get nervous, your movements are less sure,
Mm.
right? You become a little hesitant, a little
Hmm.
tentative. The overall muscle pliability is a little bit more stiff.
Yeah.
So it makes the bow shoot different. And target archers understand that. And they go, ladies and gentlemen, this is your first scoring end, right? And they'll know that that their point of impact may change a little. So they
Hmm.
shoot that first arrow, evaluate, quickly make some adjustments through the middle of the game. It starts, you calm down and
Hmm.
everything starts to flow, and then you have to move the sight again to put it back where it was, pretty much,
Yeah.
right?
Okay.
And then it's sort of a rise and fall of emotion through the point of the game. You may get a flare up toward the end, and you have to follow with the sight, right?
Hmm.
But shooting an arrow at a deer, the closest thing, shooting an arrow at that buck that just grew up out of the ground, right? And the target archery equivalent of that is you're standing there. There's this huge audience. They usually have all the lights turned off, and then the archers are spotlighted, the targets are spotlighted, the whole dramatic for TV effect, right?
Definitely. Yeah.
And you're standing there and you've got one last arrow to shoot, and that guy just missed. And your brain goes, "Oh, here we go." Right? All I got to do is hit this. And your light turns green, you pick your bow up and you pull it back. And in that instance, 5,000 people are suddenly holding their breath, waiting to see where your arrow hits.
Yeah.
And most times you can hear a pin drop in the room during that 8 second, interval there.
Hmm.
And your bow goes off, the arrow hits the target, and then the crowd either goes, yeah, or they go, oh,
Yeah.
right. So that's about the closest thing in target archery, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And the way that target archers, to get back to the root of your question, the way that target archers prepare for that, because your mind is going 100 miles an hour, your pen looks like it's moving a lot faster than it really is, because your brain is fast, your eyes are fast, therefore your pen looks like it's fast,
Yeah.
right? So there's a little bit of a scramble. So a lot of times shooters that are in a shoot off like that, they're just going 100% on their training, right?
Hmm.
It's their 100% automatic that they've created through, countless repetitions of the same thing.
Yeah.
So I have, if you search thing a week and look up Big Four,
Hmm.
that is a four-step process that is very robotic, and I explain the little nuances in between each step. But the way it works is your everybody attributes accuracy to equipment selection, uh, tune,
Hmm.
right? And everybody's always running to the tune, their arrow build, all of this stuff, and they're really into that hyper technicality. But the real story is, if I take a bow and put it in a shooting machine, it can be mistuned, and I can sight it in where it hits the X's all day long, right?
Mm.
The real variation is us,
Yeah.
right? And when we realize that the bow is just a dumb stick flinger that only does what we tell it to do,
Yeah.
and then we pay attention to what we're doing, the accuracy appears like this, right?
Mhm.
And I can take a guy who's like online and he's an adventure bow hunter and he's got problems with his stuff and he's going on a sheep hunt, up in the mountains, once in a lifetime hunt kind of thing. And all I got to do is show him this Big Four procedure and help him understand what the little pieces are. And when he's got all these pieces under control, his accuracy totally transforms,
Mhm.
right? And all it really does is it makes you pay attention to what your body shape and consistency is as you're getting into the bow, then pulling the bow back, and then putting the bow up to you,
Mhm.
right? So that way you can use your camera, your eyeball,
Yeah.
to monitor where the pin is and then activate the release so that everything goes. So essentially, in real short, the way it goes is step one, you fit your fingers in your release because a difference in how your fingers are in the release totally changes how the release shoots. So
Definitely.
you look at it and feel it into position. Then, supporting the weight of the bow with the release, you put your hand in there and you'll get that set just like you want it. Now I see a lot of guys, they pick their bow up and they're making adjustments to their grip as they raise the bow.
Mm-hmm.
Death nail for archery, right?
Mm-hmm.
For accuracy. So you put your hand in and you have it set. If you're going to shoot with your release at a little bit of an angle, go ahead and set that angle now, right? So you can look at it and verify that, yep, that's the angle I'm going to use, right?
Mm.
And at that point, put your nose on the target, right? That's how you're orienting your body to the target.
Yeah.
And from here to the floor, you'll keep all of that still while you pick the bow up, pull the bow back. You'll release the tension that you built up in your arms after you have pulled the bow back. Then here's the big one. Put the pin on, step 3, put the pin on, and then put the peep in front of your face, just like you would look at a target at distance and put the rifle scope right in front of your eye.
Mm.
You can imagine what would happen if you're looking at the ground and you put your binoculars up and then start looking for whatever it was you wanted to see.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not going to work out all that great, right? But if we keep our eyes on the target that we want to shoot and then pull the bow and put it up to us, we can control our accuracy by controlling our starting shape before we pull the bow back, right?
Mm.
And step 4 is you create pressure to and away, right? A nice straight line, which you can feel because you verified all those steps.
Yeah.
And then you just follow through, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
tell target shooters, when you're blacked out and you got to shoot one more arrow, even though the sight pin is wobbling all over the place, you just get it as close to the middle as you can. Keep your eyes in the middle. Think about pin being in the middle. So you're thinking and doing the same thing, right?
Mm.
You're not over here going, oh my God. You know, think about how many times you've pulled your bow back and you were formulating the excuse for why you missed it before you let it go.
Yeah.
Ah, you're smiling. I see it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you're thinking pin is going to be right there, right in the middle, and I want the movement to look exactly like that. Yes, I'm seeing the movement that I want. I'm going to continue letting the pressure work on the release. Bink. And then it goes. And good target shooters will hold that for a split second and then put it down and then reset everything, right? So being very studious about pressure, direction, the pliability of your fingers, how much pressure you have in the grip, all of those things before you pull the bow back will significantly increase your accuracy.
Mm.
And typically I'll see pros, they'll land in Atlanta like first thing, in the morning, get a rental car, come over here, and they're like, well, I'm in the woods. I need to figure out what's going on. I fiddled around with everything and now it's broken and I can't find my way back. And I go, okay, well, put your fingers in the release, put your hand in the bow, and then pick it up, right? And we just go back. And these guys are champion shooters. It's been shooting their whole life. But by throwing away all the bells and whistles and the add-ons and all the little things that they've fiddled with, just throw it away and go back to the absolute essence of how to shoot a bow, the foundational aspect of accuracy, and their scores and everything are back before they even get in the rental car to go fly home,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
They're like, okay, I got it, right? And then they take off and they go home and then they go beat me at a tournament. It happens way more than I want to admit.
Yeah, that's good that you're not willing, no, sorry, that you are willing to share all the secrets though as well, right? So I think a lot of people will try to keep that
You
stuff
know,
to
I
themselves.
Yeah, I look at it that, I've had my time. I'm
Hmm.
50, well, 53. I'm in my 50s now. I've had my time. And when I moved back to Georgia and opened up and says, okay, I'm going to start training people and I'm going to start like doing, archery training. And this will be my time to like help, do something for the sport, right?
Yeah.
I made a decision back then before I started putting other people under me as a responsibility that I'm okay with just being okay,
Hmm.
right? I'm not going to try to, shoot for 8 hours a day and still trying to maintain the whole champion level training and, all that. And I'm okay with just being okay,
Hmm.
right? And so I tell everybody everything and really always have, because they still have to do it, because knowing and doing are two totally different things, right?
100%. Yes.
And so I can tell a top pro my absolute best secret, but he still has to do it when he
Hmm.
gets there, right?
Definitely. Yeah, I used to coach in gyms, like doing CrossFit stuff. It was kind of like the big group training stuff I did. I did a lot of personal training and everything as well. And it was very interesting. I would work alongside athletes as coaches, meaning that they were top level athletes. They would come in and they would do coaching, but they were not good coaches at all. They were there because it fit into their lifestyle. And they would just throw cues that they thought would work. And they just kind of had their go-tos that they would say every single time, despite it not fixing someone. They could never get to like the bottom of the actual fix. Versus the best coaches I always came across were people who had gone through struggles themselves. They were okay with being okay, and they had kind of had to come to these realizations of going through and fixing things, if not just for themselves, for other athletes. And that's when they were the best coaches, because it was like, okay, well, I've got this tool, like I've got this, this toolbox of tools that I can now utilize to try and help this person understand how to be a better coach. And then they would step right into it. It's just very fascinating to kind of watch that some people, it's that whole talent versus um, is like the mindset around talent. Like if you're just born with the talent and you're just naturally good, that sometimes you're not going to go back and do the little bits and pieces of work when it needs to happen. And that's where I think sometimes if you're gifted, you can definitely be welcome to the real world very quickly if you're not willing to put in that effort.
Oh yeah, because you've heard the saying, hard work beats talent, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And I've seen several people that were extremely athletic and they picked everything up right away. And I could tell them, you know what, change that just a couple of degrees and add just a tiny bit more pressure, and that'd probably be perfect. And they can like do it, like the
Mm.
first try, they can do it, right?
Hmm.
And it's really fun to coach someone that has that level of athleticism because
Definitely.
they can do everything that you ask them to do, and you can see them improving and changing right in front of your eyes, right?
Hmm.
But then you got people like me who are totally unathletic,
Hmm.
clumsy oafs. And then everything that we learned, we had to like work our butts off just to figure out the basic concepts of pressure and direction and just feeling our bodies in space and being able to do the thing that you need to do. And I've seen many that way that really put in the work to figure it out, right? And once they put in the work to figure it out, they end up beating that hyper athletic, because the hyper athletic ones, and that's not everybody, but
No.
typically
Hmm.
the hyper athletic ones, they don't have the same work ethic because it comes to them easily.
Yes.
So the minute it gets hard, the hyper athletic ones kind of fall down a little bit.
Hmm.
And the ones that have learned to work themselves into it and do everything it takes to get it, they usually end up being the perennial winners that win all the time.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, the most basic form I can think of is even just squats. Like seeing someone in a gym doing a squat, and it should be a straightforward movement, but there's so much technicality to it. And I would see very good athletes that would end up having sort like that hurt themselves, so to get some form of injury, being either like hip or back, or usually they're both very related. Eventually, because they wouldn't make the small fixes that you were trying to help them with from word go. And so it's like it's the yeah, like you're saying, obviously the hard work beats talent, but also it's like there's things in your system or in your process that you use that are going to hurt you down track, and they're not necessarily hurting you right now, and you're getting away with it because it's just working for you. And I think this is kind of going back to what I originally said about people will come and pick up a bow and they'll just grab it and just start shooting because it's just a fun thing to go and do, and then all of a sudden 6, 12, 18 months down track, 3, 4, 5 years, whatever it is, it starts to come undone for them. It's because once again that foundation isn't necessarily there.
Yeah, it's really easy to, well, I say it's easy, but to get a bow, the pro shop guy says, here, it's simple. You just pull this back and
Mm,
you look at this little hole, and then you put this little thing onto the target, and then you just squeeze the trigger. It's really easy. So you go out in the yard and you start trying to do that, right? And because you have no concept of form or anything like that, the hardest thing to do is to put the pin on the target, right?
yeah.
So you end up struggling with the pin, trying to get it on, and you get it there and you got that finger perched up right on close to the trigger. And as soon as you manage to wrestle that right on target, pack, you shoot
Yeah,
it.
the old drive-by. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And that's why almost everyone, like top target shooters, beginning target shooters, everyone ends up having to go through that rite of passage that
Hmm.
is target panic, right? And people that have good supervision, like good coaches that are kind of watching them, they can see the problem being developed, right? We
Hmm.
know it's there because everybody has it because we all learned the wrong way,
Yeah.
right? The whole Western style, there is no way that I could make you sit with a month with a release aid and actually learn exact operation of the release through your archery lessons and you never get to touch an arrow for like a month and a half. Nobody will tolerate that, right?
No.
They want to shoot arrows that day, right? So everybody always learns a little the wrong way, and they develop the sight triggered, release. And then after a while, if you really want to be really, really, really good at it, right, you have to break that habit and relearn it the proper way so that your form stabilizes the bow and then triggers the release. And
Yeah.
when you get all of that working together, that's when you got top level archery. You got those dudes that can hit a nickel, at 50 yards and
Hmm.
not even blink, right? And everyone ends up going through that step at one point or another if they progress through their archery to the point that it's necessary. There's
Definitely.
that point on the graph, where the two lines meet that
Hmm.
you need that step that you skipped and you need that know-how that you don't have and then your rise in accuracy and pretty soon those two lines meet on the graph and you end up with your first and you're like, I just missed the whole target. What happened? And you're looking at your bow like, what is this? Right?
Yeah.
What happened? Right. So everybody ends up going through it at some point because we all learn incorrectly.
Hmm.
And starting with a bow, if you can get with someone to at least lay it all out for you so that you have a good full understanding and give you a soft start, like start off your very first shots. And this is what I do in my store.
Hmm.
And it's a very short form, right? I get a brand new bow hunter, comes in, I've never shot a bow before, and I want to go hunt deer. I'm like, okay, great. Come over here. We get him set up with a bow and the whole bit. I get him a release, and I'll show him on a piece of string how the release fires, and I let him play with that while I'm putting his bow together. And I'm watching his technique, making the release work. No, no, no. Hold that a little harder, or pull on it a little more, or whatever. You just keep working on it. I'm putting all of his accessories on. And then we go to the range, pull the blank bale up close, and then I have him pull it back and then let it down. So he learns right away how to pull back and then let down. So he's getting control of the equipment. And even though he wants a 70-pound bow, I've got that thing turned down as low as it'll go.
Yeah.
So he can actually learn how to do it, right?
Hmm.
He'll pull back, he'll let down, then he'll pull back. And I'll show him how to hook his finger on the trigger and do that same action that you were doing on the piece of string while I was putting your bow together. And then they learn the operation of the bow and the relationship of that pressure and what it is to making the bow steady and making the release fire, right? And we'll do that for 10 minutes. Shoot a few arrows at the blank bale up close so they get
Hmm.
competency with the bow and they become comfortable, a little less awkward. Then I put a target up at 5 yards away so that they can't miss it.
Hmm.
And then we'll sight the bow in until it hits in the middle, and I'll let them stand there and pound the middle out of the target at 5 yards for a little bit. Then I'll run it down to 10. They're hitting it at 10. I'll run it to 15. They're hitting it at 15. Take it to 20. And they walk out brand new, never shot a bow before, and they're grouping, red and in on a indoor target.
Hmm.
And they're competent to shoot a deer at 20 yards. And I tell
Yes.
them, if your arrows ever miss this space at the distance that you're at, that's too far for you to shoot at a deer.
Yeah.
But if you can hit every arrow you let go in this space, then you can shoot the deer at that distance.
Hmm.
And for some people, it might be 10, 12 yards. For some people, it might be 40, right? It's just depending on how far along you are in your development. Like I tell my kids, I had little 38-pound bows. We went on a hunt. There's big deer behind every tree. That's what they were ready. We got trophies behind every tree. We're going hunting.
Yeah.
And I told them, I was like, you cannot shoot unless you can see their eyelashes. And that was the gauge to, is this deer too far away, right?
Yeah.
Because they're little light poundage bows and all, perfectly tuned, broadheads and field tips in the same hole, and they were talented shooters.
Hmm.
But I was worried about 38-pound bow on a
Hmm.
whitetail, you know,
Definitely.
and at 10 or 12 yards, arrow goes right through them like
Hmm.
a heavy hunting bow. No problem, right? But by limiting them to a closer distance, they've got a cleaner kill. We have a less likelihood of having a can't find the deer kind of nightmare, and they get full penetration, the whole thing.
Yeah.
So I caution people like, this is what it looks like when you're good enough to shoot at something from this distance and be honest with yourself during practice. And if it's working out for you at that distance, go ahead and shoot a deer at that distance. If you have to, if you know your max distance is 25 yards, put a little red flag out there on a tree limb that is at 25 yards. And if the deer's not inside of that, don't even touch your bow.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that way they know, right,
Yeah,
what it
I
is.
love that. It's definitely I mean there's a big culture out here in Australia that's all for that, and they really push like 20 meters and under. Like even if you can shoot 50, 60, 70 meters, like practice at that just because obviously that will build your confidence in general. But really, and I love what you just said, if you can see the eyelashes, that's when you can shoot. That's a great one that I'm going to start using when I take beginners out. Like only
Mhm.
once you can see them and they're this close, that's when you actually want to start gauging the shot. Like I took a newbie out once and we had a shot pretty much right at the 20 meters and he missed. And I said, okay, well, that's fine. It just means that we need to now be closer. Like the adrenaline and everything else that's coming into the play, it's working you up and it's all fine. You've missed now. That's all good. We've got it out of your system. We've got the monkey off your back. Next time, we're going to be so much closer to be able to do this. And we did. We got it all done. But it was just interesting to watch him like stress over it then. It's like you could see he wanted to have it done so much that when we actually got to it, I'm like, you just need to relax. Like we're going to get as close as we possibly can. So it's literally a done deal, hopefully, once you've knocked that arrow. But yeah, it's just I really love that. The wait till you can see the eyelashes.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Yeah.
that ends up being, if you got good eyes, young people with good eyes, that's about 12, 13 yards.
Yeah. I'll keep that in mind actually, because if it takes someone with
Yeah.
glasses. Yeah, definitely. So let's build out the foundation a little bit more. Stance, grip, just the basics of things that you kind of look for when you're working with someone, be it that they've been hunting for 5 years or if they're a brand newbie coming into the shop. What are kind of some of the basics that you're looking for people to be hitting every single time?
Well, the number one thing is fit, right? Uh, Rule number one, if you're shooting your bow and something hurts, neck hurts, arm hurts, shoulder hurts, chances are your bow doesn't fit. Archery should not hurt ever, right? That's number one. So the first thing I do when somebody, I get on, like I'm on with you right now, and I go, so what are we working on today? And then they tell me, I want to get better at bow hunting. I want to extend my capable distance. I want to do, and they tell me what they want. And all right, well, let's check and see if your bow fits, right? And I do this thing. They'll first pull their bow and they'll go like this,
Hmm.
right? And you saw that little move when they do this, and
Yeah.
right,
Head tuck
and
in
they
and yeah.
fit themselves to the bow.
Hmm.
So to the untrained observer, it's like, okay, well, it fits the face and everything is extended, right? It looks really good, so that draw length probably fits, right? But then watch this. Let me back up a little bit so you can see. And watch this.
Going from hunched to relaxed, right? Like,
That's
yeah.
3 inches of draw length that
Yeah.
I can conceal just by scrunching my shoulders or sliding, bringing my shoulder blades in, right?
Hmm.
So at that, I'll have them so that they don't automatically fit themselves to the bow. I have them look at me and then draw the bow like this.
Yeah.
That way they're completely out of the archery context. And then I go, okay, settle your shoulders, reach the bow, and then with your head neutral on your shoulders, turn your head toward the target. And then you can evaluate like where the string is.
Mhm.
And most dudes are like, wow. And I go, well, you got one of those bows with the rotating mods? They're like, yeah. I said, let's move it 2 inches and see what happens.
Yeah.
Right. And they're like, 2 inches. I was like, it's a rotating mod, so you can just put it
Put it
right
back.
back where it was if you don't like it, but let's give it a go.
Hmm.
Right. And they don't even realize, and they pull it back and they shoot and they go, my bow has never been that steady. Right. It it feels so much better. I didn't realize that I was making it hard on myself because the bow just didn't fit, right?
Mm,
That's the biggest thing. I have a talk that I did at the ATA show on my YouTube channel where it's the most recent one, I think. I've got a new one that I'm going to put up soon, but I think it's the most recent one that's out there right now. And I go through a whole thing about taking the weight off of the stabilizer bars
mhm.
so you can see the uncorrected movement of the bow.
Because essentially weighing your bow down will slow that down, right?
Correct. Yeah. When you
Yes.
have the weight on the bars, it slows everything down and it basically conceals mistakes,
Hmm.
right? So target shooters, I have them shoot a lot without any weight on the bow
Mm,
because they can see when they change the pliability of their body, they
hmm.
can see the effect on the sight pin and they can figure out what muscles do I need to try to turn off and which muscles do I need to pull with. And when I pull with it, what's correct because the pen will get super steady. And what does it feel like when I get it right? And you can feel all of that when you don't have the bow weighted down with stabilizers and a quiver full of arrows and all that extra stuff.
Yeah.
So you basically can make corrections to what you're doing incorrectly that's upsetting the whole harmony between you and the bow. You
Mm,
can make those corrections much faster because they're not being hidden from you with stabilizer weight.
yeah.
So in that video, I outline like when the pen is hard and fast, draw length's probably too short.
Mm,
If the pen wanders slowly but never really settles, draw length's probably too
too
long.
long. Yeah.
And you can find that sweet spot where the pen just bobbles around in the middle of whatever it is that you're looking at, and you can shrink that movement down. I used to tell people start with it a little bit long so that it's kind of loose and slowly decrease the draw length until you can see that aiming pattern get smaller and smaller and smaller. And then at one point, you'll make one more adjustment and it'll get kind of hard and dodgy. And when you see that kind of, then you know to back up a little bit so that you're in that
Mm,
sweet spot there, right?
yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Then as you're shooting on, you do the same thing with peep sight. A low
Hmm.
peep height makes the bow really hard, and a high peep sight makes the bow really loose. So you
Hmm.
need to find that sweet spot in the mid range of your distances, right?
Yeah.
Like if I'm shooting a big popular tournament over here is Reading, and they've got distances from 3 yards to 101.
Hmm.
And I don't want to set my peep sight up for 101 because all of my short distances, the peep will be too tight.
Yeah.
But when I look at all the distances in the tournament, the fat middle between like 46 and 63, that's the kind of that's where 75% of the targets are in that
Hmm.
tournament. So I set my peep sight height at around 53 or so yards. So I've set my peep sight to be absolutely optimum and dead stable in the middle. So then it's a light trade-off on both ends.
Yeah. It's very interesting. Yeah.
Because your anchor at 100, like if you have your peep set up for 20
Hmm.
and then you move your sight down to 100, your anchor has to change a 1/4 inch to be able to see the sight through the peep sight.
Yeah. Wow.
And every internet archery coach in the world will tell you must have a solid anchor and
Mm,
that's immobile and it never moves. They've obviously never looked through a peep sight at 100 yards and they
yeah.
haven't figured out they can't see the scope through the peep at 100 unless they move the anchor, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So understanding that that anchor thing is afloat So during step two, when you pull the bow back, and you settle yourself, then you go to step three, you put the pin on the target. When you swing that peep into view, you look through the peep first. So then it tells you where you need to touch on your face for
Yeah,
that
wow.
particular distance.
Yeah.
So you get optimal stability at all distances, not just that one that you have it set up at.
Mm,
So that's
yeah,
kind of how it works.
I really like
Most
that.
times I go, you can't have a solid anchor. And they're like, oh, heresy, right? It's like, you can only have one anchor. And that's true. All this stuff that you heard, like stiff side of the arrow, and you must have a solid anchor. You must touch your nose to the string. That came from recurve bows.
Mm,
And yes, a recurve bow, you have to have a solid anchor because they don't have a peep sight.
yes.
You have to touch your nose to the string with a recurve to keep your head normal to the bow when you're uphill or
Hmm.
downhill. But with compound, we got this little tiny hole that we look through, and it runs the whole show. So as long as you're looking at the target through that hole, you're good to go.
Sweet. Yeah. So what about let off? Does this affect this in general? Like you've got I don't know, an 80 compared to a 90% let off bow. Is that going to affect this whole process?
It doesn't affect the process, but the higher your let off is, the more unforgiving the bow can be,
Meaning
right?
like the high percentage, so 90% compared to 80%. Is that what you mean?
90%, it's almost impossible to be clean enough to be penny accurate with a 90% bow
Mhm.
because every little mistake, every little variance in body position, it shows
Mm,
because there's like this moment of slack before the bow takes over and shoots the arrow.
yeah.
And that moment of slack is deeper with a higher let off bow than it is on a lower let off bow. Like
Mm,
it's you can feel it when you go to let down a 90% let off bow and then let down a 65% let off bow. You can feel the difference in that the depth of the valley when you start
mm,
to let it down,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So any face drag or something like that, too much pressure with the nose, vein touching your chin, little things like that, or even just your shoulder being from here to here will
Mm,
completely change where the arrow hits, and you can't feel it with a 90% let off bow. It'll telegraph or maximize every little thing that you do.
hmm. Yeah, interesting. So
So
what is there like an optimal?
70%, 70% is a good middle of the road,
Hmm.
right? I grew up with like 40% let off bows, and I remember when 65% was like, oh my God, this is just insane, right? Now 65% is the low end, and
Yes.
it seems to me that most people can manage 70% really easily. Even if they're somewhat intermediate, they can
Hmm.
still manage 70%, and it doesn't magnify their errors quite as much. An experienced shooter can shoot 75 or 80, but they're still not going to have as high a scores as what they would with 70,
Mm.
right?
You're
So,
talking about complete accuracy, like the penny size shooting
yeah,
with
we're
it.
talking
Yeah.
about complete accuracy. And again, you can't discount the fact that if you make a mistake with a broadhead, it's magnified.
Hmm.
So I'll argue that it takes a higher degree of accuracy to be accurate with broadheads than it does with field tips,
Hmm.
right? Because the broadhead, just like if your arrow is a little out of tune, the broadhead departs from your field tip fairly quickly. So if you make a mistake, the broadhead's going to depart from what you're aiming at fairly quickly.
Even if the bow is completely tuned in, you're saying there?
Even if the bow is completely tuned in, because if you're shooting an arrow through the paper, and you make that mistake, it won't shoot a bullet hole, even
Mm.
though the bow is tuned to one,
Yeah.
right? And you've probably seen it. If you stand there in front of the paper, I'll have people practice their grip placement by just shooting arrows through the paper. And you'll notice that if you change the pliability of your grip or change the influence on the thumb or let your wrist slack a little,
Yeah.
completely
It
changes the
shoots.
paper tear left to
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. So, I mean, this is a good follow on in regards to the grip. What is kind of like the good cues that you can kind of give around positioning of the bow of the, yeah, of the riser? Where should it be when you're holding it in the handle and everything?
So I'll give you one good magic trick, okay?
Hmm.
And you can really see it with one of these. This is like a pivotally mounted, like bow grip here,
Yeah.
okay? And when I hold this string, right, and I'm going to show it to you both ways here.
Hmm.
So when I hold this string, right, let me put it up in front of my face so maybe it'll be what I do when I put my hand in the bow. I put my hand in the bow with my palm flat to the floor.
Okay.
And note that my thumb is below my forefinger,
Hmm.
right? So my hand goes in the bow like this,
Yep.
right? Now here's where the magic trick is. I put just a light pinch,
Hmm.
not very heavy, just
Pinch
enough
between the
pinch
thumb and the pointer finger for those
between
who are
the
just
thumb
listening.
and the base of the forefinger like this, right? And that aligns that V between my thumb and forefinger with my forearm.
Hmm.
And then I'll transition that pressure over the whole grip surface.
Yeah.
I'll go from here to there so that my
Yep.
grip has even pressure over the whole grip surface.
Yeah.
Okay. Now I'm going to set something up here and make a quick
So to explain that a little
cam.
bit better, you're essentially meeting the wall of the handle, then with the meat of your thumb, essentially, was what you were talking about, going from that position of having your hand facing palm down to then meeting to the where the grip is.
Right. And I'm
Just
going to
for those
set
who aren't actually watching and just listening.
and I'm going to set something up here so that you can see this. Let's see here. All right. So this is from one of my seminars here. And I'm going to switch the screen for you so you can see right there.
Yep.
So that's that trainer that is in my hand when I'm showing you the demo.
Hmm.
And I'm going to demonstrate here. Let's see, let me put myself back on. Okay, there I am right up in the corner. So when you relax your hand, all the internet archery coaches, you must have a relaxed hand, right? Let me show you what happens when you relax your hand. So when you relax your hand, it changes the angle of the
Yeah.
grip.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah.
You see?
The bow's moving so much. Like it goes from pretty much a straight on to like a 45-degree angle change
That's
sort of thing.
right.
Yeah.
And all you got to do, and you can see that when you notice the angle of your arrow related to the bow,
Mm,
then just relax your grip and watch the riser change related to the plane of the arrow. You can see that at full draw with your bow.
mm,
And most people allow that to be relaxed, and their grip slowly melts as they're aiming.
yeah.
And they're like, my left and rights are all over the place. And the magic secret is that light little pinch between you and the grip. If you just make this shape right here and then stick that right in the bow, right, you'll have it. And just that light pinch keeps the rotation of the grip exact shot to shot.
Yeah.
And it also manages the pliability of your thumb where the grip is rested. So that is also a very consistent consistency, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Can you just show that positioning again of the fingers that you were just saying? Yeah.
Just like
Yeah,
this,
okay.
right?
It's like
I'll
a
put it in
stairway.
like that and
Yeah.
go like that. And typically I can touch my middle finger to the grip and I just let that top finger just curl. I take the ring finger, the little finger, curl that up inside my hand, and I'm in it just like that. And it's a
Mm,
dead bullet straight from the front to the back right there. If you just see how it lines up
yeah.
with my arm there, right?
Yeah, definitely.
And that's the best way to get your grip set and make sure that it stays consistent shot to shot.
Hmm.
And just that one little thing can totally transform your accuracy. And that's the look those tiny little things that mean so much. A guy who is just a bow hunter and he's just trying to figure out how to shoot more accurately. And when I show them these basic steps to get to full draw and show them the little things like here's how you make sure your grip is good, right?
Hmm.
And that leapfrogs them 10 years of trial and error
Mm,
trying to figure it out on their own. And then they start like up here
hmm.
instead of way down here and the struggle bus all the way to, trying to figure it out.
Definitely. Yeah, I remember going out hunting one time with a friend and we were hunting pigs and we had lots of opportunities in the day. And my shot just kept going right. And it was still like I was still getting a lot of kills, which is great. But I just said to him at one point, I'm like, bro, my shots are just going like 2, 3, 4 inches sometimes to the right compared to where it seems to like where I'm aiming. And he's like, oh, check your sight. And I checked it all and it was all fine. I'm like, can you just watch what I'm doing? And when I even bringing my own attention to it, talking to him about it, I realized I was like strangling the heck out of the bow. And that was making that shot just go, yeah, whatever it was, a few inches to the right. And there was one shot that I did in particular. And it was lucky in the sense that it still did damage, like a lot of damage to the pig, but I had to do a follow-up shot. I'm like, that's not where I want to be. What's going wrong? And that's when I really questioned it. And just that questioning, it was literally I was just choking the bow. And so having that repeatable process, and I've really worked on that in general, but I've not used this process that you talk about. So I'm definitely going to play with that a lot.
Mhm.
Yeah. So going back then, I guess, into the release aids, where do you start people off? Is there a preference in what people are using for a release aid? Is there like obviously if you can learn how to use a release aid right, whichever release aid you have, then you should be fine. But is there things that you'd prefer to start people on, be it a trigger release, a thumb trigger, a back tension? Like where would you have ideally everyone start if you could?
So it's individual based.
Hmm.
If a guy's like, look, man, I just want to shoot bow and I want to get started shooting bow right now, I'll hand him a trigger.
Yeah.
But that trigger is really hard, to master and get really good at it. It's really
Mm.
easy to dump and, shoot arrows right away.
Hmm.
But if someone is like, I want to buy a bow and I want to be good at it, I'll fix them with some sort of handheld. So that way I'll teach them how to use the pressure of full draw to make the release activate
Mm.
and then show them how to train that in so that they can go home and they can work on it and they can learn it and get it going. And they have the potential to be more accurate faster with that type of release because it actually uses the pressure of form to activate when used properly.
Yeah.
With one mounted on your wrist with the index finger, it can be done, but it's very difficult.
Mm.
And you're a baby, Mama throws Cheerios out on your tray, and then you start picking up the Cheerios and you put them in your mouth. The very first developmental milestone is that index finger, hand to mouth,
Hmm.
kind of thing, right? That's the first thing you learn. And that becomes so hardwired, that index finger is so hardwired to sight that it takes a lot of determination to shoot correctly while your eye is watching the pen wobble around in the middle.
Mm.
It's really hard to not let your subconscious just let it go.
Yeah, okay. That's very
Right.
interesting. Like to relate it all the way back there, that's very interesting. So in
Yeah.
regards to then like people who use multi variations of release aids, is there anything against that? Like would you prefer that one person sticks to just one release aid and that's kind of like find your thing and stay with it? Or do you like it to use like do you like people to use different variations for practicing?
Sometimes, right? And
Hmm.
if someone comes to me and they go, look, man, I got shot execution problems, target panic. I've got shot execution problems and I'm punching my release and I'm kind of losing control of my archery because I can't control the release. Often I'll get a pressure activated release
Hmm.
to teach them how to pull to
Mm.
make steadiness with the bow. And that pull fires the release no matter what you do with your hand,
Yeah.
right? So I'll have them learn with that pressure activated release first. And then once they master that and they're shooting great and they have total control of their shot process, then I can take a button or a hinge and stick it right in the stream and show them the manipulation that it takes, how you let the pressure of the bow transfer to the release.
Mm.
I show them that one little part and they practice that in and they can move right into a hinge or a button or
Yeah.
something like that. But if I can get someone to learn a release before they try to shoot a bow with it, they're usually 75% more successful with that release than they would be if they go, let me try this release, and they pull their bow back and aim at a target and try to shoot it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Makes sense. Makes a lot of
And
sense.
everybody does it. They walk in a pro shop. Yeah, give me that release. And they go over to the range and they shoot a bunch of arrows with it. Yeah, this one's great. I love it. I'll buy it. And as soon as they get it home, their brain figures out how to punch that one, and it's not so awesome anymore.
Yeah.
As a past release aid designer, I loved it when I saw a guy walking into an archery tournament with a chandelier of releases hanging from their quiver because they're constantly switching releases trying to stay ahead of the shot problem,
Yeah.
right?
That's very interesting. That would be funny to watch. I had a guy on just recently, Graham, who went through a big process of target panic, kind of affected him for many years. And he had it where essentially he would draw to full draw, and he couldn't hold his hand on the pin. It would always, sorry, on the target. It would always be low. And he fixed it eventually he came through and did a few different courses and stuff. But one of the things that really helped him was every day for a month, he drew back and he just held the bow on the place where he wanted to be shooting. So he got the pin to it, held it there, wouldn't actually release, came back down, kept doing that on and on and on. And eventually, after 30 days of doing it, he started shooting and he's been able to really maintain it and been really all over the top of it from there onwards, which plays to a big psychology part, which I'm sure you probably have some answers to in regards to like the psychological overcomings that some people maybe need to come to before they can bring it back to them. Like, I don't know, is there anything to that or?
Definitely. I mean, the whole genesis of that, there's two camps, right? There is I can't put my pin in the middle of what I'm trying to hit, but I can shoot the release perfectly. Or I can put the pin in the middle, but I can't make the release fire, right? And people end up kind of separating themselves. There are physical reasons as to why you're having a hard time maintaining the sight in the middle of the target. But there's also psychological reasons for that. To know the difference, usually if it's a physical problem, the pin starts in the middle, but then fades out as you're trying to shoot it.
Hmm.
That's usually a form issue that's dragging the pin out of the target,
Yeah.
right? But if you draw back and orient the pin down below and slowly raise it up to the middle as carefully as you can, and then as soon as the pin touches the center, the finger taps the release.
Hmm.
So you develop this subconscious connection. Sight touches middle, release fires. But you've developed your archery to the point that you're very steady and you can put the pin in the middle. But you know when the pin touches, it's going to spontaneously shoot. And you're not wanting to do that. You're wanting to accurately shoot to get a higher score. So therefore, you can't put the pin in the middle. So what your friend did by pulling back and aiming and then letting down, he desensitized himself from the pin being in the middle and something having to happen.
Yes.
Because
Okay.
we all learn with the wrist rocket trigger and we wobble the pin near the target. And as soon as it gets there, we let it go, right?
Hmm.
So we develop that problem within the first days of shooting a bow, right?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
Later, it develops to where you're very steady, but you just can't put the pin on it because of that subconscious triggering of the release. So typically what I have people do to work their way out of that is very similar to what your buddy was doing, just aiming and letting down. But I pull the target up so close that you can't not be in the middle
Yes. Yeah.
and then stand there and just shoot it, right? I'm talking 5 yards,
Hmm.
right? Or even less. And stand there and just pound the middle. Stand there, hold it, aim it, look at it, and steadily release. No matter what you do, no matter what mistakes that you make, it's really hard to drag the pin out of the middle.
Mm.
So you get used to the idea that the pin starts in the middle for a good shot, stays in the middle throughout the process of the shot, and then the arrow hits the middle.
Mm.
And at that point, you're working more on the shot execution part because you're so close that aiming is no effort at all.
Hmm.
Then move the target 2 yards farther away.
Yeah.
And that changes the difficulty of aiming a tiny amount.
Hmm.
So you begin to see a little movement. The pin stays in the middle, release goes off perfectly. You hit the middle, and you still have that constant repetition. So you never have that feeling of urgency when the pin is in the middle, you don't have that feeling of urgency that something has to happen and your brain starts scrambling, wanting the release to hurry, hurry, hurry and fire, right? You know that you just put it in the middle and it stays there until the release works,
Mm,
right? So you continually master each distance and then move it a little more, right? So you slowly learn and build that aiming component as the target gets farther away.
mhm,
And at about 10 to 12 yards, the form that creates the pressure that makes the bow aim very still, and that same pressure that activates the release, it then kind of marries those two pieces together so that they start working. Somewhere around 10 or 12 yards, they start to knit together.
yeah, okay.
So then pin wobbles middle, release fires, it's right on time. Shooters will develop a timing, and you can
Mm,
about set a stopwatch from the minute their bow gets steady. It's 4 seconds before the release fires, right?
yeah, wow.
Because the form is a process, it's a building process. And if they take 6 seconds to build the process, the shot will be in 6 seconds, right?
Hmm.
If you've got a 3 pound trigger and you put your thumb over that 3 pound trigger and you put 75% of the pressure on that trigger that you need to make it fire, all you have to do is transfer about 3 pounds of pulling pressure to make the release fire, right?
Hmm.
So as you walk away and as you get around 10 or 12 yards, you see the pressure stabilize the pin. It kind of goes unsteady, control, steady, quiet, tighten, bang. And then the release goes, right? When you've got it perfect.
Hmm.
And then you continue walking that target back to 20 yards. And when you can get to 20 yards, draw the bow, plop the pin in the middle, look through the peep sight, create pressure, the release fires, and off you go, right? When you have that down, you've gone through that whole process, you can then confidently shoot broadheads, dead center. You can shoot tournaments, you can do the whole thing. And when you've gone through this repairing of target panic and, shot execution issues, whatever you want to call it, you'll still warm up with that walkaway routine. You'll still revisit that walkaway routine. I mean, I've kind of figured out how to do all this and sort of invented the process fixing my own target panic, right?
Okay, yeah, interesting.
And I still, that was 30 years ago, and I still go back and repeat that. I'm in the
Mm,
middle right now of walking down the floor, just polishing. I got a big tournament coming up in a week, and I'm just polishing my execution, trying to get
mm,
it as clean as I can so I can shoot a big score when I get there, right?
yeah.
And when I get done with that event, I'll come home, I'll train through that again just to make sure it's sharp and it's ready for Vegas in a couple more weeks.
Hmm. Yeah, I love that. It's really cool. I've done the close barrel shooting, about a meter and a half, or I don't know what that would be in yards, maybe 3, 4, 5 no yards, not even. But essentially, very close shooting and just going through the process. But I went literally from going 30 days of that to straight back to 20, 30, 40 meters instead. So
Yeah, see, you need the in between to
yeah.
build two pieces. Because one thing I didn't say that I need to make sure that everybody hears is that blank bail is to learn and understand the technique.
Hmm.
And then a target at close range is to learn how to aim and execute with the new technique. That's why
Yeah.
you have to slowly walk it away. Because if you do blank belt for 30 days and then jump right out to 20, your brain is going to start using the old way of shooting. In about 20 shots, you're going to be right back to what you were doing
It's
before
very interesting.
because
I,
you've
I should
practiced that the
confirm.
most,
Yeah, I should confirm. I was doing target close, target far, but I didn't have that in between that you're talking about that I
Yeah.
think is also very, very valuable.
Yep. It's basically it's a slow adding of the aiming
Mm,
difficulty so that you can keep the new technique because your brain defaults back to what you've practiced the most as soon as the aim gets unsteady.
mm,
And that's why target shooters spend so much time repetitiously training very simple moves so that it is so innate, it's so automatic that when they go blackout and they shoot that last arrow, it just works and they don't have to think about how to do it when they're
yeah.
under pressure.
Definitely.
Because when you're under pressure and you've got that like barrel of the gun moment, and you can't rationalize and think in high concept
Hmm.
type things.
Very hyper
All you know
focused.
is pin on, pull the trigger. That's it,
Yeah.
right? So, in order to be successful under the peak amount of pressure, is you have to be so automatic in what you've done through repetitious training so that it just works.
Mm. Yeah, definitely. How many shots does it take to become a repetitious thing that you can repeat?
So the real answer, and people hate this, but the real answer is it takes as long as it takes,
Yeah.
right?
Okay.
And but I usually tell people when you think you got it, shoot 100 more games at that distance
Mhm.
and then move,
Yeah.
right? Because most people go, I've been successful once and now I'm ready to move, right? They haven't really made that automatic yet, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
But if you've been successful, that's you've gotten control of the technique. And then you have done that technique beautifully with 500 shots. Then when you move to the next level, you're going to clear that next level a little faster.
Mm. Yeah,
Right.
definitely.
And you'll find that as you move down the floor and continue going farther away, that you're clearing the next level just a tiny bit quicker as you go because you're gaining mastery. Once you cross over 10, 12 yards and it starts really popping, you're gaining mastery. So you'll finish that last little bit pretty quick. And shooting a perfect score at that distance is not time to move. It's shooting perfect shots at that distance.
Mm.
Because at 10 yards, I can totally trash a shot and still hit the X, right? But I know it wasn't good, right? You want 100% good shots before you add the distance.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Something I used to do with all my weightlifters when I was doing a lot more coaching was also help have them finish on good reps. Like if they went too heavy and they kept missing reps, I'd be like, okay, let's scale it right back, like drop the weight back. Let's get back to good technique, finishing on good reps, just so you're not finishing on a bad um, thought process, essentially. And that definitely helped to some degree for a lot of them because they wouldn't be sitting there thinking on like, I'm horrible at this or whatever it is, the negative train that it puts you into. Is that a similar concept that you would ever have archers do?
Well, archery is different,
Mm.
right? So with weightlifting and archery, you have form, right?
Hmm.
But with weightlifting, there's a lot more muscle use, there's a lot more power, where archery is really more about balance and fine pressure, right?
Hmm.
So what I tell people, as soon as you have gone through the warm up, you've been super successful and everything is working, and then you get to the point that you start making a bunch of mistakes, that's the time to lay off
Okay,
and then
makes sense, right?
give
It's
it a
time to
day.
tire yourself.
You know,
Yeah.
yeah, because typically shooters will start making mistakes or they start blending steps together, they lose focus or whatever when they've shot too many arrows.
Hmm.
And I've got kids, scorching ADD, and they'll show up and they'll shoot 30 arrows at a distance and their mind starts wandering and I catch them making mistakes. And I'm like, hey, lay off, go do something else for, a half hour and then come back and rededicate yourself to actually getting this right you
Hmm.
know so it's a personality thing.
Yeah.
The more hyper focused driven types, they can stick with it all the way, all night long. The more people that need a little bit more variety or novelty, the ADD types, you got to kind of take it in smaller bites in
Yeah.
order to get it right.
Yeah, makes sense. How about so recently I have not been shooting my compound bow at all. I've been shooting my longbow a lot. Purely because the compound bow is out of tune, it needs a new string. The new string's on its way. It's getting tuned up in a few weeks' time, and that's when I'll start shooting. Like, go back to it. But the transition from going from one bow to the other, is there issues that come from doing that because it's different shot processes? No.
No, and I encourage, dudes with compound bows, I'll hand them a traditional bow and say, here, try this,
Yeah.
It's a lot of fun to play around with a traditional bow, especially when
Hmm.
you're taking a break, from shooting your compound. And often I'll show up with a longbow or a recurve. I'll go to a 3D shoot and just whiff arrows all over the woods just to
Yeah.
take a break break from the like competitive,
100%.
everything
Yes.
is serious and it must be done exactly right, all of that. And I can go back and kind of reconnect with the fun of archery
Hmm.
just by shooting my longbow or a recurve or playing around with the kids, shooting the little school bows and stuff. But I've never seen anyone have a problem with flip-flopping back and forth.
Okay. Yeah, that's good to
And
know.
Olympic level archers will often cross train with the compound bow
Yep.
and to kind of understand and use that aiming technique,
Mm.
right? And they can transfer that to recurve. So cross training between the two for top level target shooters, it's a useful thing.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Something that I didn't touch on that I think we probably should is like the sight and looking like I think different people will aim differently based on sight, like eye dominance, essentially. So some people close eyes, some people keep eyes open. What they see and what they're focusing on within the target is probably going to vary. What is kind of the overall or the best practice that you can help people with that for what they're actually looking for?
Okay, so I don't have any evidence at all
Hmm.
that one eye closed or both eyes open are any more accurate than each other,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
So that's a comfort thing. I'm a both
Yes.
eyes open guy
Hmm.
unless the lighting is really low or if I lose contrast between my dot and the target in target
Hmm.
archery, and I can close one eye and get a little bit more contrast for a good shot.
Yeah.
But most of the time, I'm rifle scope, both eyes open. I'm spotting scope, both eyes open, and I'm just both eyes open all the time. So,
Hmm.
some of the best shooters that's ever lived shoot with one eye closed.
Yeah.
So I don't have any evidence either way that one
Okay.
is better than the other. So do what you like there. It won't
Yeah.
hurt you.
How about in regards to what you're actually looking for? Like I think some people will focus a lot on the pin. Some people will focus on where they're actually trying to aim. Like, what's your concept for what you're trying
So
to look for?
you need to be looking at the target and you
Hmm.
need to have the pin in your secondary vision. And that's different from firearms shooting. Firearms, they say focus on the front sight, those things. But archery is different, right? Because archery is never dead stable, it's always moving. And what you look at, the pen tends to follow your eyes. And what you think about anchors your eyes to whatever it is you're looking at. And you may have noticed out there shooting your hunting bow and your mind wanders and the pen wanders as well, right? And that's what that is, right?
Hmm.
So, top level accuracy, you need to be looking at the target and thinking about what you want your pen to look like over the target. Both have to be working correctly for the peak level of score and accuracy.
Hmm.
Because if you're thinking about what you're going to eat for dinner and your mind is empty while you're aiming, any distraction can walk right in there and ruin the whole thing. But if you have a script that you chant or drone in your head while you're looking at the target, you'll be a lot more successful and you'll have a lot more great shots because your pen will do whatever it is you're thinking.
Yeah, it's the whole Joel Turner angle of things, right?
Well, it's two things. There's the Joel Turner thing where he uses that mental control
Hmm.
for controlling the release aid or controlling the form or building pressure, right? A shooter that has learned all of that and they have it automatic, you can use that to make sure that your aiming and your attention and focus stay on task,
Hmm.
right? So whatever it is that you're focusing on or droning in your head, that's what you're going to get, right?
Yes.
So if you're trying to make the release aid work, you use your thought patterns to make sure that the release aid works. If you're
Hmm.
trying to shoot a good score, use your thought patterns to make sure the pin stays in the middle of what it is you're trying to shoot. And like every pro on earth uses that Joel Turner technique. He just organized it all in a very good teachable model and gave it a
Definitely.
cool name.
Yep.
So he can present that a little bit better. But that's only a tiny piece of it. It's not the whole package.
Hmm.
It's just the execution piece, which is totally necessary. But there's more around that that has to be in place too to make that work.
Definitely. Yeah, and I think that's what I mean, you've definitely, uncovered a lot of that just even within this little talk that we've been able to do, right? Where you're going through the bare basics that are actually such a foundation for being able to deliver the result that we want to, that we're chasing at the end of the day.
Archery can be quite easy if we allow it to be.
It's interesting how convoluted we make it though, right?
Yep. I
Yeah.
mean, look at dudes that shoot longbows. You see how technical they get with their arrow selection and tuning of a longbow? I'm like, just traditional archery is supposed to be easy, man. Why are you getting all into it like that, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. And I think it's just half an excuse to go and tinker and use it as an escapism as well, right? It's like get whole hog into this new hobby and just want to go ham and do everything to kind of bring it and make it your world. It's like, how can I be more involved? Because if I can't go shoot my bow, I just want to be playing with arrows or doing this and doing that.
Yeah. But if you consider this, your tune, your arrow selection, uh, all of the little nuances that you fiddle around with your equipment, and guys get really fine. They get way more fine with their archery stuff than a bench rest rifle could even tolerate, right?
Mm,
As far as accuracy. All of that time spent on that is time you didn't spend honing your shot execution. It's time you didn't spend getting your bow fit so perfect that your bow is stable, right?
mm,
And tuning techniques that create forgiveness for the bow are fantastic, right? But that's still the icing on top of the cake. It's not the cake,
hmm.
right? The shooting technique, the attention and focus that you develop, and how to put all of those things together, that's the cake. And then the forgiveness aspect, stabilizer bars, shooting in your timing, torque tuning the bow, all of those kind of things. That's the icing on the cake that makes it more forgiving when you do make a little bit of a mistake.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
So if you'll get a very small percentage of increase in accuracy through all of the tuning and making sure that all of that stuff is razor perfect,
Hmm.
right? But you'll get a significant percentage working on you instead of the equipment.
Yeah, yeah, I really like that as a perspective. I mean, it hits home, and it's just interesting. I've never been one to play around with my gear that much. Like, I don't tinker, I don't play with it, I don't have a bow press, I don't tune. I'll take my bow to Ian Summers is one of the guys out here that does it for everyone, or a lot of people in Australia. And you go and you do a session with him. He shoots with like you shoot in front of him, make sure that everything is completely perfectly set up, and then you walk away with your bow being nice and ready. You just know that it's ready for me to go hunting. I'll shoot it and it'll be repeatable as long as I'm doing the right things. And I just love that, like just having that confidence in the gear straight away. Versus, I think if I was to tinker and play around with it so much, that's where it would potentially. That's when I'd start second guessing so much.
Right. When I'm setting up my hunting bow, I'll set it up. I'll get a nice clean hole through the paper. I'll go outside. I'll shoot my broadheads at all distances. If my
Hmm.
broadheads and field tips are hitting at all distances, I'm done. And I
Yeah.
go back to making sure that I'm shooting the bow the way I need to shoot the bow.
Hmm.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like that. Do you recommend that people, like as they start to take on archery as a sport, that they definitely use different bows for bow hunting versus archery?
Yes, I I usually use that to sell more bows. I see a guy, he gets really into archery, and he starts kind of getting into the target archery aspect. And I go, man, you're kind of wearing out your hunting bow shooting these tournaments. Maybe you should get a target bow. But I see, like, I have, since, archery is my life, I have like a couple of bows set up to shoot outdoors. I got
Hmm.
a couple of bows set up to shoot indoors with super fat arrows, a couple of bows set up to shoot indoors with the smaller arrows that are world archery legal. I
Yeah.
got one for outdoor arrows. I got my hunting bow. I got all this stuff, right, that is dialed for the specific game.
Specifics. Yes.
And in the target archery sphere, I'm shooting the same exact bow, the same arrow rest, same release, and all that. The only thing that's really different might be the diameter of the arrow that I'm shooting, and maybe the aiming system might be a
Hmm.
little bit different so that it's optimal for the game that I'm trying to play.
Yes. Yeah.
But for the most part, same weight, same draw length, same bow, all that stuff's the same. And then my hunting bow is a completely different animal that I, set up completely different, and I'm just shooting deer with it.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. Regarding bows in general, then, like, have you shot for? I don't know, admittedly, I don't know much about your history. So have you shot for many different brands? Are you like, where are you at right now? What do you shoot?
Well, I shot Hoyt from when I was a kid. I was a prodigy recurve shooter when I was a kid, and boy, you're going to the Olympics, all that kind of thing. And I got bored with that because there wasn't a whole lot of people to shoot with back then with the whole pure Olympic recurve thing in my area.
Mm-hmm.
So I looked at NFAA and who shoots the highest scores and what division has the least rules. And I went for that one, and that was compound freestyle. So I shot Hoyt up until the point that I took a job with Martin Archery. And for about a 13-year period, I shot Martin bows. And then when I left Martin, I went right back to shooting Hoyt bows and have been there ever since.
Yeah, okay.
Right.
Interesting. Yeah. So a lot of trust in Hoyt then.
Yeah, I mean, they take care of me. They're great folks. And it's the only company out there, really, that has a dedicated target bow that is specific for target archery, right?
Mm.
If you look at the other brands, they have a bow that comes in color, right? But it's really a stretched version of their hunting bow. And
Interesting.
it's the same exact cam, it's the same everything, and in some brands, it's even got the same high let off as their hunting bows have.
Mm.
So Hoyt is they're very target archery focused, and they put a lot of money in target archery. You've got the Easton Foundation that pretty much keeps target archery on the scene, that keeps 3D on the scene. And I look that Hoyt and Easton as companies put so much money into what it is that I love. There's no
Mm.
way I'm going to shoot something else just because they support me and what it is that I do.
Hmm.
And they are deeply involved in the stuff that I care about with sponsorship money and everything that these organizations need to put this stuff on. So I'm sticking with them.
Yeah, putting their money where their mouth is. That's good to hear.
Yeah.
Um, you, I believe, were the coach for the Olympic team for the Paralympics. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was a Paralympic team. That was Tokyo.
Okay, and so what does that look like? Obviously, we learn these skills with what we have, and yet there's people who are out there that are shooting with their feet or with their mouth because they
Oh,
don't
yeah.
necessarily
Yeah.
have the ability that we do. So what does that look like in regards to changing the process for someone like that?
Coaching the Paralympic team is probably the most interesting thing that I've ever done.
I can imagine.
It really broadened my understanding of archery and how it
Hmm.
works, the like
Mm.
physics of how it works. Because, we talk about back tension and anchor points and all this kind of stuff. And then here I am with a dude that doesn't have any arms and
Mhm.
he's trying to shoot the bow with his feet. So he doesn't have an anchor point because he doesn't have a hand to put up to his face,
Yeah.
right? He's using butt tension instead of back tension, right?
Wow.
And
Yeah.
you figure out how to look at someone and figure out first how to adapt the equipment to whatever it is that they need so that they can pull back and let go. Sometimes
Hmm.
there's some fairly significant customizations of the equipment. Sometimes there's significant customizations to gear that they strap to themselves so
Hmm.
they can pull it back or, whatever. So that part gets on my product designer kind of, interests. That really got in there for me. And then watching a shooter who either is missing an arm or shooting a bow with their feet or they're shooting it with their teeth or whatever, and watching a shooter and figuring out, okay, when they do this, it makes a straight line and it puts the pressure straight with the target. So if they can let it go with this, right? Then they can have a higher degree of accuracy. So we'll do something like lower the tail end of a chair or the stool that they're sitting on so they can be a more
Yeah.
balanced
Wow.
feet
Yeah.
when they're holding the bow with their feet. It could be something as changing an angle in their apparatus so it's easier to keep something straight.
Hmm.
It could be making a custom release aid or figuring out a special way to do the little mouth tab that they grab with their teeth so that it's consistent. So it was really a big stretch on the coaching skill to help them improve as shooters and get the most out of it.
Hmm.
And it's also a challenge because they don't fit the book as far as archery form is concerned. So you got to figure out how do they hit tens and how can we get more of it,
Yes. Yeah,
right?
definitely.
So, and I take that now to coaching able-bodied people
Hmm.
is I'll watch them shoot a bunch of arrows and go, all right, when they do this, they hit tens and it really works. So let's build on that and see if we can make them hit tens more consistently. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of value in filming yourself, right? No matter where you are or how you're shooting, because then you get to see how you are actually shooting. And obviously, you do need to have some form of a trained eye or know what a good shot looks like. But at the same time, it helps you to, I guess, do perfect practice when you do understand that, when you can watch yourself back and go, okay, well, this is what I need to change, or this is where I can fix.
Yeah. When you're trying to learn a skill, it's great to watch yourself so that you can see and feel, right?
Mm,
And there's tons of apps and things like that. So you can get delayed feedback. You can use a mirror image with a projector. You can do all sorts of stuff to make that work. But you still need someone who is
who
not
knows?
emotionally invested in what you're doing to look at the videos,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Because I can look at my own self shooting a bow, right? And the videos that I look at of myself are the ones that are taken in competition
Mhm.
while I know that I don't know that I'm being filmed and I'm shooting the real shot, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I can look at that and think, oh, I need to fix that. And it looks a little funny. And that shot was inconsistent from the one before. But then one of my buddies can look at it and totally rip something else apart because
Mm.
they're not emotionally invested and they don't skip over stuff that I just don't see because it's me,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
They see the stuff that really needs to be seen. So if you're really serious about being the best at what it is you're trying to do, you got to get with somebody that knows more than you do to actually look at what it is that you're doing.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, in business in general, I try to put myself in many rooms where I'm the dumbest person there. Like,
Yeah.
it's an
Smart
uncomfortable feeling, but a
practice.
great way to be. Yeah. It's like, I'm just going to learn so much today. I can't wait. Yeah.
Right.
Well, George, thank you very much. I really appreciate this chat. It's been really cool. I think we've had some great insights to everything that you do, and I mean, really, I had a lot of aha moments in general, just over the stuff that we covered, which is really, really awesome. So I thank you for that, and I'm going to definitely dive into a lot more of your content. One of the things you talked about was thing a week. So thing a week, tip or technique that you kind of drop every single week, but it's not on your YouTube channel, if I'm correct. What YouTube channel is
Yeah,
that on?
it's on Last Chance Archery's YouTube
Last
channel.
chance. Yeah.
And their YouTube name is LC or at LC Archery.
Hmm.
But you can just type thing a week archery and it'll pop it right up and you can go right to it and find it.
Excellent. And then the other place I'll refer people back to is also like, and it covers up on what we were just talking about, someone else looking over your form, is improvemyarchery.com, because obviously then you can have George's eyes on you, having a look over your
Yep.
form and your technique. And so how does that kind of typically work in the sense of you'll hop on a call like this in Zoom and you'll just start the process like, hey, take some shots for me. Is that kind of
Yeah,
the,
typically somebody's got a target set up in their living room or something, and all they need is like, just, 4 or 5 yards just so they can shoot the arrow. I'm not even looking at where the arrows are hitting, and I'm
mm,
just looking at how they're shooting the bow. And I'll listen, like they'll tell me, like if it's an experienced shooter, they go, I've been having trouble with such and such, and I want you to take a really close look at that and see if you can help me figure out how to do it.
yeah,
But if it's someone who is kind of developmental and they're like, I don't know what I'm doing wrong, I just can't hit anything, and I want you to try to give me some tips to make me better. And I'll just look at the whole package, let them shoot a few arrows, and we'll do things like adjust draw length and change the peep height. And I'll explain to them how the different little pieces of form relate to each other. And we can do really well, even online through a Zoom, call of, you know, zeroing in on the stuff that needs to be more consistent and to fix that.
yeah.
And through Improve My Archery, you can book an in-person lesson here at Archery Learning Center.
Hmm.
You can book an online, or you can contact me about coming to your area to put on the full workshop. So
Hmm.
you can have 20 of your closest friends, and I'll look at every single person's form in the room during the course of the weekend while we're doing the workshop.
Yeah, that's amazing. Very, very cool little offer. So if people want to follow along, your Instagram is George Ryals IV. So I'm guessing George Ryals the fourth. Is that
George
correct?
Ryals IV. That's where the nickname GRIV came from.
It's Griv. Is that what they called you?
It's
Or
grip. Yeah,
yeah,
that's kind of where that came from. Yeah.
yeah, okay. And so, have you got a son that's now George Ryals the fifth?
I do have a George Ryals V. He's
Yeah,
pretty
wow.
talented in archery. I've got another one. His name's Leo. He's pretty talented himself and just won a few tournaments this year as well.
Yeah, yeah, that's very cool. And so, if your son, is it essentially, how does this work? Is it an assumed thing and you just do it out of respect for the family, or is it like you have to name your first son George Riles?
It is tradition, right?
Hmm.
Firstborn son of George,
Yeah,
right? Ends up being the next number. But I did tell my youngest son, I George the fifth, we call him Quinn for quintuple.
yeah.
And he goes, if Quinn doesn't have kids, can I have George the sixth? I was like, absolutely.
That's excellent. Yeah, my in my family we've got a tradition where the firstborn son gets the dad's name as the middle name. But the
Oh, that's
firstborn son
cool.
in my family, being my brother, he hasn't actually had kids yet, and so I'm intrigued to see if he does use that once he finally does start having kids. I've got two girls, so I wasn't passing anything on apart from my last name to start with.
Dang it.
Yeah. Good stuff. All right. Well, thank you very much for your time, George. I really appreciate it, mate. It's been really great
All
talking to
right.
you.
It's been fun. I'll see you next time.
Thanks, mate.